if one wants to talk about being a responsible steward for the environment and the things you can do, if you're a business leader who wants to decrease the inputs into your product, and that sounds like that makes good business sense, so I know they're doing it. And look, we know private corporations are putting way more logically sound R&D into this issue than these sort of quick government press releases that they're sending out. By all means, do what you want on this issue. And if the prime minister wants to plant 2 billion trees, there's multiple benefits to that. So I support it. But the idea that we need to say, oh, we're missing our Paris targets, as if this voluntary deal we've signed up to is some sort of gun to our heads, and that if we don't do it, we must self-flagellate and punish working class Canadians is bogus. I think it's kind of malicious, and it's not consistent with the facts.
Peter, did you want to follow up on any of that?
Well, the point you mentioned originally about the fact that the emissions were down by 8%.
That was the estimate for the year.
Yes, yes.
What the estimate was. I don't know what the final number has been.
But according to the UN, we need to reduce emissions 8% each year for the next 10 years, so that by 2030, we're operating under the stress of 10 simultaneous COVID crises. Does that sound very attractive? Of course, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's impossible. And I'm always amazed by an organization called the International Energy Agency, which is a shill for climate alarmism and so on. But unfortunately, it has to make projections of what is really going to happen to energy. And according to the IEA, none of this is going to happen. Every year they tell us that solar is going gangbusters. And I remember I asked them last year what the total proportion of solar was in primary energy demand. And they rounded the figure as it was down. And the figure was 0%. It was actually 0.4%, but they rounded it down for me. And yet we are told that solar is the way of the future, when solar is unreliable, inflexible, disruptive to systems. And that's the idea that we can be relying on wind and solar, which is, and the same of course applies to wind, is utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, so it's totally true that in the past year, we've changed our lives so dramatically that to expect this kind of, it's unsustainable. If the goal is to reduce by more than what has been reduced globally every year, I mean, it's almost anti-human being. I remember seeing at the beginning of the pandemic, these posts online, we are the virus and nature is healing. And I don't know if you guys saw things like that. But the whole concept to me is very anti-development and almost anti-human being. And it goes against the way people want to live their lives. And I know that I assume that our friends on the left don't view it this way, but development from my point of view is necessary to improve human quality of life. So Rex, do you have anything to say on that about why their solutions are so different from ours and why we see them as so damaging and they don't?
Well, I'll pick up on something that Anthony said, and I'm glad he said it, and I just wish that it had a deeper currency among the citizenry when he points out that ours is not a prime minister that has a policy. Ours is a prime minister that on the green game is an activist. I've scribbled it for what that's worth. I've long tried to tag the current government. It's liberal, yeah, but it's green liberal. It's greener than the NDP. And if it were possible to store more chlorophyll into the greens, it's as least green as they are. And the one thing that does not, and this is where I'm picking up on Anthony, one thing that Mr. Trudeau does not walk away from ever is this fascination that somehow this country, Canada, holds, I don't know, some key to the success of stopping what he regards as apocalyptic global warming. It's not only illogical, it's ridiculous. The idea that we have China's and India's and Russia's and America's and Europe's, all of which are exponentially more powerful in terms of the issue we're talking about. And in the case of China, certainly the largest by far, exponentially. And that Canada, and in particular, shrink it down to Fort McMurray. If we stop the TMX pipeline, then, oh, the world will be saved. The obsession is worrisome, but it also means that the powers of mind that should be applied to real problems, that should be applied, we were talking about local and global, that should be applied in this present moment, are being ignored. The fascination, the obsession with this ideology, and understand this, there was a time, I think in the 70s and the 80s, when people spoke about environmentalism, and they were waking up to the idea that we, meaning the human beings, had been treating our towns and our small rivers and our cities as a kind of a garbage heap. And we were doing something of the same with the air. Well, we woke up to that, and you had the cleanup programs, and you had the moving all the dirty stuff out of towns. People became genuinely and praiseworthily sensitive to, let's live like decent people. In the case of the highest environmentalist, however, and you hit on this, at the beginning of COVID, there were not a few high environmentalists going online saying that Mother Nature is mad at us, and Mother Nature is now turning the stern back of her hand on the human race for what they're doing. I dare say Greta went off to some Apollo shrine in Greece to get the latest instructions on this. There is something this is going right to your question. There is something in a totalitarian ideology like green that wishes to rule everything. What's wider than the environment? The environment literally is every other thing but you. And the hard environmentalists, and Mr. Trudeau had some of the hardest, Mr. Butts, the hardest environmentalists look upon human beings as somewhat awkward ancillaries to the otherwise inanimate cosmos. But how it burns so deeply into the minds of people that you have them running around deciding what color clothing to wear to reduce their carbon footprint, or getting $15,000 to buy some damn Lexus because it's hybrid. It's farcical, but it's not farcical enough, because it seems to be that there's a stream in Western thought that wants to dissociate itself from all of its great successes, its civilization, its technology, and curse the means by which we got it. Energy and food are the two basic instruments of all life. And in terms of modern society, this thing we're doing here now, or a CAT scan at the university, or the development in record time for a vaccine. All of these are plugged into the appliances and resources of our society that only came about because of the wealth generated through energy, and of course, the application of mind. And the application of mind only comes into full play when we don't have to struggle every hour of the day for a living. We built a society large enough to leave some portions of it just thinking, call them universities. We built a society large enough where others could walk off and puzzle through things that daily want would have chased away from us. Environmentalists are let's be candid. They are anti the world we're in. They despise industry. They hate energy. And in some weird way, if they want to live in the Wizard of Id until it comes to them. The last point I'm making, I'll shut up. You will note that all of this, the great forest of NGOs and the great summits in Paris and Rio de Janeiro and the high capitals of the world, when they go out to save the world, they go out in numbers like Attila the Hun's followers. They go to the best places. They're always on someone else's dime. Environmentalism could not exist without the society that it actually criticizes continually, and it is a parasite. It is a parasite on the very society that it condemns. If our civilization fell, there would be no need of the environmentalist. It is the strongest, most enduring idea. It has millions behind it, and it is a propaganda machine. And by last point, no government, and by the way, no opposition. Aaron O'Toole could be Justin Trudeau as far as the Paris Climate Accords. This has, you asked the question, what can you, it has to be resisted. You have to speak out against it, and you have to defy the conventional idea that if you deny global warming, you're some sort of benighted Neanderthal. Push back against accepted thinking, and don't listen to what you hear on almost every single television station and radio, because they've been drenched in this garbage and know no better.
So actually, it's interesting you make some of these points, because in the book, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab, he talks about the idea that economic growth isn't inherently good. That we have some type of obsession or fetish, like a market fetish, and desire for growth. Economic growth and has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty across the world.
Does he cut his paycheck 10% every year?
He doesn't say he wants no negative growth.
He doesn't say he doesn't want negative growth for him or the UN or any of those international associations. They're fatter than the Gadarene swine.
But just the idea to me that to say economic growth is a fetish and that it's a bad thing, it would cause so much harm to so many people who have benefited from economic growth. So Anthony, I want to ask you your opinion on this and how you push back against an idea that just seems so inherently in common sense wrong.
Well, I want to pick up on two things Rex said. One thing very profound about putting the power of mind applied to real problems, because one thing, Christine, that I found is that the past, and I'm getting more of it every week, by the week, by the day, I'm getting emails from people who are very serious people, engineers, business executives, these long emails where they're running the numbers on what's going on with the pandemic in terms of the various rates of this, that, and the other, and running the numbers on ICU numbers and fatality rates and all this sort of stuff. It is a very detailed stuff. And these are very bright minds and top level people. And they're saying a lot of this, doesn't add up, or I would do it differently this way or that way and so forth. And you realize we're quite blessed to live in this 21st century situation where we do have so many great accomplished people around us, and we're not putting them into service to deal with the biggest problem that we have faced, at least in my lifetime. What on earth is going on? For years, I heard about how we're living in the age now of analytics and big data, and there's all these big firms, and they're charging tons of money to micro-target someone to sell them a shampoo or what have you, but we can't micro-target our response to this, which is, putting our civil liberties up in total on hold and causing so many harms that are not being discussed as much as they should. And I think it's really shameful that we haven't really broadened the conversation, both for this, and it doesn't bode well for talking about, these other issues that people want to bring into the mix. And to add to that, Rex previously spoke about elections, how the stuff that we're doing right now hasn't been approved, by anybody. And look, basic technical questions of genome sequencing, or how many specialists or how many nurses are required in a shift to staff an ICU ward. I don't know those things. I'm not going to pretend I have the answers to those questions. Those are specialty questions. But when we get into these broader questions about, for instance, there are many jurisdictions in North America that have schools open right now, many that have schools closed right now. That is clearly a whole of society conversation to be had right now. And that you would cede that conversation to just one or two particular individuals, generally people who are not even elected people, we have a problem right now. And we're not, one thing that I know a lot of people in Canada are frustrated with right now is we're not even talking this out. I think this event we're doing right now is fantastic. And I'm sure a lot of people have not been able to even participate in a conversation like this since March. Brian Lilly and I did a video on YouTube, and we were debating various issues. And I was shocked by the response to just so many people emailing me about it and talking to me about it and everything. But why are people like, thanks, I'm glad there's the clicks on it. Why are so many people talking about it? And I realized because there hasn't been conversation or debate since March. You're just not allowed the biggest thing that has happened to many of us in our lifetimes, we're not allowed to fully just hash out. And I think that's a real problem. And it doesn't bode well for future issues and future conversations.
Can I jump in on just that one point? On just that one point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anthony is extremely at the very center of this when he points out it is the biggest thing. That's a bad, cheap word. Well, it's the biggest event, and it swaddles all of us, and it's in all the countries. And yet, I just keep it to Canada. As he points out, there's no forum for discussion. And this is what I wanted to stress, which is why I jumped in. Of all the moments in our common experience that we chose to severely amputate or close the one organ of national discussion and debate, which was put in place to keep the country together. There's never been a time since 1945 when Parliament has been so amputated, restricted, and dismissed. People are not startled, and they should be, when we had for 3 or 4 months a lone prime minister walking down the steps of his then residence and throwing out 20 and 30 and 40 and $50 billion every morning. Not a sight of a cabinet minister, no opposition, the press under some carnival tent. The civil liberties that are being eradicated in this is also our liberties as citizens. If the damn Parliament closes down, and if they end up on some of these, I'm not talking about this one, but these farcical 3 and 4 people in Parliament on Zoom, this is the time when they should be there and the debate's taking place. The second point that Anthony makes, at least by implication, because there isn't discussion, we're getting very accustomed to this. This is, I hate to say, this is normal. Obviously, that's why I'm wearing this fool thing. It's illegal to get a haircut now. I don't know if Stalin got that far with his regulations, but in the 21st century city, a great metropolis like Toronto, you can't get a haircut. We should worry very, very much that government, having tasted the license of non-accountability, non-attendance in the Commons, and passing regulations at will become very comfortable with that, and that they have seen a population more or less, either, as Anthony says, cut out from the discussion or somehow or other too anxious to get in. And I'm sorry to have jumped in.
No, it's a great point. You know, like this year we can smoke legal marijuana, but we can't get look, and we look for black market haircuts. Okay, I want to sort of build on something Rex had said, and I'm going to throw this question to Peter. This is about the expanding role of government in this crisis. So we know that in times of crisis, governments tend to expand their power, and we saw, this isn't new. The World War I led to the creation of the federal income tax. World War II led to its expansion, and we've seen the role of government expand after 9/11. And anytime there's a crisis, the scope of the state expands, and we often do not see that rolled back. I mean, I still pay income tax. That never went away. So how hard is it going to be to push back against the expansion that COVID is creating, including things like expanded EI, support programs for business, calls for expanded role of government into healthcare, for example, like taking over long-term care homes. Perhaps the only area government seems to be doing less is education, but maybe Peter, you could make a comment about that. Are these expansions here to stay?
Well, the simple fact is they can't be, because we cannot afford them. There is no magic money tree. We have borrowed ourselves into a huge hole. So this isn't the time to be expanding government or introducing Green New Deals. It's the time there will have to be cutbacks at some stage.
Or tax increases, right?
Well, yes, tax increases. They can't go on borrowing forever. Interest rates won't stay low forever. But could I just come back to what Anthony pointed out? I mean, this is, if you're talking about government competence and settled science, the COVID experience of the last year is not a great recommendation for the wisdom or ability of governments. And also, mentioning Schwab's book, Schwab, in fact, makes the amazing statement that this is, in fact, the best world we've ever had. But then he says, well, but then again, as long as we have any ills in the world, then we must, at some stage have a socialist dictatorship. I mean, George Floyd, of course, was a terrible tragedy, but Klaus Schwab would have George Floyd saying, not, I can't breathe, but we need a great reset. Also, the idea that the incompetence of government should give us faith in even larger government organizations is totally ridiculous. For example, the World Health Organization, Schwab has suggested that the World Health Organization would be much more competent if it had much more money and much more power. This is typical of his message. But getting back to the point of what this is going to mean for us in the future, it means, higher taxes. And if we have Green New Deals, then we are talking about crippling the economy. I think it's important to remember that the idea of the Green New Deal, which was first suggested after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, is based on the falsification of history. It's based on this idea that Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1930s saved capitalism from itself. In fact, what made the Great Depression great was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's interventions, which increased uncertainty and demonized the rich and business. So if we have a Green New Deal, we will in fact be in danger. In fact, we will be certain to have a great Green Depression. So that's just an additional burden we cannot possibly tolerate, which I think is the reason why they have to, far from going ahead on these crazy plans on wind and solar, etc., they have to reel them back.
Sorry, I just want to follow up on your George Floyd comment. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Do you mean that
well, no, Schwab
is so focused on his priority?
About the ills of the world. So he thinks that everything should be dragged in.
I see.
The ills of the world, from Black Lives Matter to at Me Too.
I understand.
These are all reasons why we need a great reset, which makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay. All right, Anthony, do you have anything you want to add on your view on if these expansions into our civil liberties or economic expansions are by the government, are these here to stay?
Well, I think Rex nailed it when he said the fact that so many people are taking it so easily without any follow-up questions or criticisms suggests that maybe this one is going to wrap up, but there will be another one, and the pretext for it might be even less justified than this current one. But well, they did it once. Remember, we did it in 2020, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever it is. So we can do it again. I mean, back in March, we weren't sure what was going on, and we thought maybe we had a mass death scenario on our hands, which was why, okay, everybody go away and nobody come out of their houses for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. And then thankfully we developed evidence and the data and the treatments, the therapeutics to deal with the virus came along. Things have vastly improved. And this isn't me randomly saying this. I've been privileged to speak with ICU docs who are treating COVID patients on the ground. They all say, well, we're kind of dealing with this now, and we just have an acute problem in a few places like long-term care and a few other areas and so forth, which really lends one to ask, is what we're doing right now entirely justified in terms of all these civil liberties restrictions that we have? And make no doubt about it, we are living in an authoritarian state right now. The question is just, to what degree do you believe it's necessary? How long do you think it should last for? Which element of it do you endorse and not endorse? And it's very frustrating. I get this a lot, in the columns I'm writing and so forth. the incredible irateness that a certain segment of the population have, that you would even dare to ask these questions. And that is what is so bizarre and so troubling, all of this, that such a visceral thing is being done to all of us. And some people, it's one thing for them to be okay with it and to believe it's justified because the medical community is debating amongst themselves about it. But it's another thing for you to go, wait, this person is doubting whether or not an independent bookstore, which has never had 3 customers in it in the first place at a time, should in fact be closed or not.
Yeah.
How dare that person? Let's shut them up. That's what really troubles me in all of this.
Rex, do you want to build on that?
I think Anthony, again, no need for me to be here as long as he's talking. You're dead right. I very much appreciate you pointing out that if you urge that a discussion, an argument around established points, not some weird thing, that there are a cadre, and I'm afraid it's very large, that instead of saying, well, Mr. Furey, I'm glad that you have exfoliated this to the point where we see that there may be variation of opinion, or perhaps the bookstore should be open, but maybe we'll hold off on the, in other words, there would be a spectrum. But Anthony is absolutely correct that if you run up against what is a predominant ideological fixation, and to some degree, part of this COVID is part of that. If you run up against that and challenge what is reputed to be the set opinion, the consensus, the fixed opinion, then you're not in a discussion. You're either a bigot, a Neanderthal, or any of that great stream of terms. This, and here's the connection you should make. This was never stronger and remains as strong. In COVID is one thing to put a second opinion out. Go back, Anthony, and I'm sure you can, and Laurie Goldstein can for sure. When 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you said, I'd like to see if there are other arguments about whether or not there is an apocalyptic global warming in our future. I'd like to know the status of the data that can project to 2100. I would like to hear the voices of some absolutely credentialed scientists that are not allied with institutes for global warming and hear what they have to say. If Frederick Dyson, Nobel physicist, has a perspective on this that challenges the stewed up, press-fed opinions of the ultimists, the millenarians, if you criticize this, the inverted commas, famously Al Gore, the science is settled, probably the most ignorant statement in the history of the world, you were a denier. They wanted to tie you to the Holocaust, which is the most vile insult that ever came out. That also tells me, this side point, that the people who fashion good causes and who see themselves as Galahad saving the world, they are often quite vicious. I question the charity of their hearts when in the place of an argument, they turn around and more or less call you a Nazi denier. We don't have these discussions, Anthony, for 2 or 3 reasons. One is the tremendous shout back from the radical or rabid crowd, but there's even a bigger reason and one more to worry. And this perhaps is a small break in the dam. That people who are not political as such, who are only political in a small way, they have over the years watched the global warming debate, or they've watched the Israel debate, or they've watched other debates. And they've come to see that these things get so nasty, get so personal, in the present moment, even to the point of losing jobs. A lot of the citizens of the developed democracies have adopted a social code that it's better to shut up, be silent, not challenge the person in your office who continually lets go his or her opinions because they're right. And if you disagree with that set of opinions, frequently sexual, ethnic, economic, and green, somehow you're a non-citizen. We've got to throw off this self-imposed blanket on what we say and what we think. And there's no bigger moment and there's no more critical one than the one we're at now, where the COVID is winding down and governments and institutions and NGOs and environmental associations are going to attempt to yoke the atmosphere and the policies and the government oversight that fitted a pandemic to ramming through an agenda that less than a third of the population has even heard of and even less approve of.
Thanks so much. We've only got about 2 minutes left, and I just want to ask one closing question of everyone. Let's do Peter, Anthony, and then Rex. And what I want to ask each of you is, one thing we all probably agree with Klaus Schwab about is that we do need to rebuild. I think that that's not even a debate. But what does rebuilding look like? None of us like the ideas that Klaus Schwab has outlined in his book. But what do you want to see? And is there a reason to have any optimism about what rebuilding could look like? Let's go to Peter first, and just try to keep your answers like a minute, because we're almost running up against.
That can't be done.
This idea of rebuilding, it's not as if we've been in a war. We don't have property and factories destroyed. They're all still there and they're waiting to operate. The idea of the Great Reset is that somehow we should sweep away these factories and make them redundant and find the money somewhere to build a bunch of new installations and infrastructure, which is in fact less efficient than it was before, because we are not using very efficient fossil fuels. We're using wind and solar. So I think it's a mistake to fall for the line that we're rebuilding. We're not rebuilding, we're just regenerating what we have here already.
Okay, so maybe we don't all agree with Klaus. I meant more rebuilding the economy, which has suffered significant damage. Anthony.
Well, I think the problem is the Great Reset, and generally also how the Liberals talk about the economy, is they'd want to top-down micromanage which industries rebuild more aggressively than others, and we need to push back on that. And as I was saying earlier, we're blessed to have so many innovative people in Canada, small business owners, large manufacturing, great minds, entrepreneurs, and a lot of them have been really hit hard, and it's awful. But at the same time, private capital's going to do its thing, and let's let those entrepreneurs and that Canadian talent do its thing, and let's not let the government pick and choose. Which preferred industry of theirs is going to be the one that gets to run away from the starting line before everyone else.
Absolutely. Rex, for the last comment.
You did say a minute, did you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Here's my last comment. The global warming ideology is not as direct and instant a plague as COVID-19, but it is a plague, and we should all fight every implication of it. The Great Reset may be the envelope term for that, but every chance you get, from town hall to coffee shop to the Houses of Parliament, whenever you hear this stream of radicalized ideological nonsense, bark back.
Okay. Thank you, all the three of you, so much for contributing today. It was a really wonderful discussion. I knew it would be a lively one with the three of you. So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn to my friend Aaron Woodrick, who's going to make some suggestions on things that all of us who have been listening today could do ourselves to kind of push back against some of these longstanding ideas that we disagree with.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. And I'm just going to share, I've got a couple of slides here because I know one of the most common things that we've been hearing from people is, what can I do? What can I do? A lot of questions are, this all sounds great, but I want to actually do something tangible. And so we came up with a few things that you can do. And so I just want to remind everyone, we had a lot of people sign up for this. I know sometimes it can feel like you're alone, like there's no one with your worldview. Well, there's thousands of people on this call right now. Last time I looked, it's about 2,300 people. So there are clearly a lot of people with whom this issue resonates. And so you shouldn't feel alone. You should know there are a lot of people out there like you. And we do these calls because we want to foster a engaged community, push back on some of these policies that threaten our freedoms and our livelihoods. And as Troy mentioned off the top, you can leave suggestions for future topics in the Q&A box. But because, as I said, people want to do something, I'm just going to leave you with these 7 suggestions for things you can do. And the first one is to support the organizations on this call. You know, a lot of us do very good work. We tackle the issues from slightly different angles, but we are active voices on these issues. And so we encourage you to look these organizations up, and Troy will also share, when he shares some of the call notes later on, information about the organizations. To network with each other, you know, again, through the call notes. And when you meet people in places like on social media, make sure that you talk to each other, because you can only build the movement if we coordinate and work together. And speaking of networking, leverage social media. There are no gatekeepers in social media. It is a way around the mainstream media. They can't censor your message. So be sure to share these messages on social media as much as you can. Push the Conservative Party, frankly, every political party, federal and provincial. You know, at the end of the day, we do need to, if we want ideas to be implemented, you have to have politicians and parties that are sympathetic to your message and believe in what you believe to win. So if you know conservative politicians, speak to them, pressure them to speak out on the issues you care about and to act accordingly. Future events, of course, the Strong and Free Network, we've got a best practices forum coming up April 9th. And I believe a networking conference April 10th as well. So plan to attend those. Recruit more people. Again, to get more people involved, we need to have more people hear these messages. So the next call, try and think of 2 people that you'd want to invite to an event like this. If you can, try and find a young person, at least one of the 2. You know, getting young people engaged is very important, and a lot of them are very disillusioned with politics today. So if you can think of new people to invite, please do that. And last but not least, something very concrete, we want you to make a phone call right now. We want to encourage you to call the federal environment minister. His name's Jonathan Wilkinson. Call him today. I'll put the phone numbers on the screen there at the bottom. The 613 number is his Ottawa office, and the 604 number is his Vancouver office. You should call his office and let his staff know that you oppose the carbon tax, the second carbon tax that they're imposing, the plan to designate plastics as a toxic substance. I can tell you politicians respond when they get an earful, and we want you to keep it civil. You can be, of course, firm and passionate, but please keep it civil when you're calling these politicians. We don't want any obviously any threats of violence or anything like that, but do make your voice heard. I can tell you, having some experience with this, if hundreds and thousands of people call an office in the same day, they will recognize that there is a problem. So we'd encourage you to do that today. And with that, just like to thank again all our speakers, Peter, Rex, and Anthony, and my friend Christine for moderating. And we look forward to seeing you again at a future event.
Okay, well, thank you all, everybody, so much. I don't know if Troy is going to come back on to say bye to everybody, but thank you, and I hope everyone has a great day.